What's up, guys? So today we have a question by Test, and it's actually 3 questions. So the first question was, what do you think of Ross Ulbricht? I think he's a fucking legend. Yeah, I think he's awesome. Now that said, a lot of people think that Ross created the first darknet market, and that's not true. He created the second one, but he did create the most popular one to date at that point. And he made it a lot more mainstream. But I have a ton of respect for him, you know. I think he got a really bad rap. You know, I don't think he deserves anywhere close to life in prison. The man didn't kill anyone. He didn't, you know, like you hear this, like you hear people talk about him. They're like, oh, well, he tried to have people killed, and he never, like, he never got, like, none of that was in his sentencing. Like, he didn't get sent. It wasn't the reason for his sentence. And in fact, from my understanding, like, it was never he didn't actually get charged with it, you know? So it's completely irrelevant because it was never proven to be true. And like, this dude still got a life sentence for a non-violent crime. And remember, he wasn't a drug dealer and he wasn't a drug user, you know? He ran a website. Like, this dude legit ran a website and got a life sentence. And it was just purely to be a sacrificial lamb. And, you know, show the sheeple that, like, if you go on the dark net, this can happen to you. And like, I'm not a fan of those scare tactics, you know. I think it's wrong. And I don't think he should be, you know, doing life. I was glad to hear that he got out of ADX. ADX is one of the, you know, the most securest federal facilities that exists. It's been described as a clean version of hell. It's, you know, horrible place for anyone to be. So Ross, you know, he's been moved to a USP now, or United States Penitentiary, which are by and large, again, horrible places to be. They're not as restrictive as where he was, but you still have, you know, a ton of really dangerous people who are there. But he's alive right now, so I think that speaks a lot. I think that's a great, you know, a great thing. But like, what do I think of him? I think he's awesome. That's what I think of him, you know. So the second one was, what was the scariest thing you saw while being a vendor? I didn't really see anything scary, you know. I saw things that aggravated me, you know, people on the forums screwing people over, like people hopping on there, preying on people, you know, convincing them to buy product off this person on the forums because this person on the forums isn't a vendor on the site, because they're scam artists and they want to get that person out of the escrow system. But like, really not, I didn't really see anything scary. There's, you know, you know, and that's a big thing, like on YouTube, like you plug in like darknet, and like most of the stuff you're gonna get are some, you know, uneducated teenager, you know, that's like, you know, made a stupid thumbnail where it looks like they're shocked, and it's like, I found this scary video on the darknet, like, you know, this alien video I found on the darknet, and it's just nonsense. It's like that kind of thinking that's perpetuated, especially here on YouTube, really aggravates me. And it was one of the like the motives for me, like giving my talk or talking about the darknet in general, is kind of, you know, hopefully to alleviate some of that ignorance that, you know, I'm not saying you're ignorant, but some of that ignorance that's out there that exists about the darknet and how it's like this, you know, spooky place where, like, you know, people get killed every day and hitmen exist. Like, half those people that are hitmen are either scammers or they're feds, you know, and it's probably a pretty even split. It's like, you know, a lot of the people who are selling guns or gun parts are feds. Like, you know, I would never buy a firearm on the dark net. You know, I would much rather buy like a Ghost Gunner 3, and, you know, go with that, over buying some, forget that. No, not a chance. But yeah, like it's not a scary place, you know, like if anything, the deep web is going to be scarier than the dark net. And like, you know, the difference between the two is like the deep web, there's no commerce being conducted, you know, it's just kind of forums or websites or like things that there's no business, you know, there's no money being exchanged, you know, it might be political activists or it might be, you know, something like that. I mean, Facebook is on the deep web, right? They have a .onion address. So doesn't the CIA, you know, it's just a different sort of web. And like at the end, it's just not indexed by search engines. But like, you know, at the end of the day with the dark net, it's, you know, stuff that's for sale, whether that be drugs or anything else, stuff that's for sale. Like, you know, scary stuff, I guess, would be like, you know, human trafficking. But like, you know, a lot of that stuff, you know, it's not like how you see it, like, you know, portrayed on, you know, a lot of television shows, or like, you know, you watch Mr. Robot and like the guy, you know, selling the people on the darknet site, and it's just, you're not going to see that, you know. And on most darknet markets, I've never seen individuals for sale on a darknet market. So Tess' last question was, do you ever have any thoughts of getting back into it? No, absolutely not. Hell no. There's like the reason I did what I did was it was just a poor decision that I made. And like I have an amazing family. I have, you know, my wife, my children. It's something that is not even, there is no way that it could ever be worth it. You know, someone could say, hey, you know, I'll give you $10 million right now to be a darknet vendor for 10 minutes. You know, that risk, it's you know, it's not worth it to me. You know, I would rather be broke and poor and have my family, and, you know, the love of my family and my freedom, than to disappoint those people who care about me the most and end up, you know, back in a place full of socio and psychopaths and, you know, liars and, you know, selfish people. And because that's what prison is, you know. And at the end of the day, there's a, like, if you can do anything on the dark net, you know, if you can move on it, if you can sell things, if you can, you know, if you can operate on there, if you can operate an illegal business, you can operate a legal business, you know. And that's, you know, the realization that I've come to now. It's more paperwork, it's more time, you gotta file taxes, it's pain, right? But at the end of the day, you're not gonna risk doing 25 years in feds. So your return on investment's much higher. Logically, it makes sense not to do that, you know? And yeah, it's just not something that I have any interest in whatsoever. But I do have interest in educating people and letting them know about it and teaching them about it, because again, like I said earlier, like there's a lot of misinformation, you know, disinformation that's put out there. And I have no doubt that a lot of it's intentional, you know, scare tactics, to get people to not do it. It's like anytime a darknet vendor is arrested, the Department of Justice has this big press conference, and like I swear all of the United States attorneys and assistant attorneys have like the same script they read, and they're like, if you do business on the darknet, you're not safe, we will route you out, you can't hide behind Tor, you know. And it's pathetic that they have like this script. And it's like, at the end of the day, it's like, you know, they scoop up water in a 5-gallon bucket, right? And they're like, look, we got 5 gallons of water. And, you know, they toss it, right? And like, then like you zoom out and it's like them at the beach and they just scooped up water and tossed it against the tide. Congratulations. Like, if you think that had an effect, you're delusional. If you think because of that bucket full of water that you've just stopped anything, you're delusional. people are going to do what they want to do. Like the darknet, all these systems, they were invented, and cryptocurrencies were implemented and created as, in my opinion, as a way of trying to find freedom, like cryptocurrencies for financial freedom, to get away from these banking tyrants that exist, who are like, you want to send money? I want to wire you money. Well, that's, it's $15 to wire money, and they're not spending anything. They're tyrants, and at the end of the day, like, I'm sorry, I just don't like bankers. And it's like, Jesus, he's the only people that Jesus was violent with, it was like bankers, the money changers at the temple. But, I digress, side issue. Hell no, I would never get back into it. I have no interest in it whatsoever, aside from educating people. And if I happen to educate people who they're interested in it because they're involved in it, then that's cool too. Like, at the end of the day, it's none of my business why you consume this content. I think it's no one's business, to be honest with you. And I'm sure like the vast majority of people that are watching this video are doing so out of pure curiosity, and all of you are awesome for that, for being curious and broadening your horizons. I think that's awesome, and I think it's commendable, and I think it gives you power. Seeking knowledge and obtaining knowledge makes you more powerful by having that knowledge, even if you never use it. Just the fact that it gives you power. I think having knowledge empowers you, and not having any knowledge obviously does nothing for you. It makes you weaker, and it makes you easier and more susceptible to manipulation and exploitation. So I hope that answers all your questions, Test, and it was awesome being able to answer them.